Hello and welcome to another amazing part of What If Shadow Was More Tech-Focused? Terra Ace wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Time: 6:00 a.m. Location: Akane Nishino Mura's home. Date: Friday, a chilly day in November. Akane Nishino's alarm buzzed softly, rousing her from a dreamless sleep. She blinked groggily at the ceiling, momentarily disoriented. The faint hum of Tokyo's morning life seeped through the thick glass windows of her room. Slowly she sat up, pushing the pristine white duvet aside. Her gaze drifted to the framed family photo on her bedside table. It was taken years ago during one of the rare family vacations her parents had managed to arrange. Her father wore a stiff smile, her mother looked distracted even as she posed, and her brother, Akira, stood slightly apart as if reluctant to be part of the scene. Akane stared at her own younger self in the photo, a bright, cheerful child who hadn't yet understood the distance that existed between her family members. Akane groaned. She really didn't want to get up. But this was her sleepy self talking. She had responsibilities to get to, people to talk to, life to live. Still, these blankets were so warm. Willing herself out of bed, she went to her bathroom with her day's clothes, her school uniform. Another day awaited. Breakfast was quiet as always. The large dining table, an extravagant piece of dark mahogany, was designed for 8 but often seated only 1. Akane's parents were still overseas, their business ventures keeping them perpetually away from home. They called occasionally, but the conversations were brief and formal. Questions about her grades, her career, and her health were asked with polite interest, but the warmth of genuine concern was absent. Akane knew they cared in their own way, providing her with a luxurious home, the best schools, and endless opportunities, but their love felt transactional, not emotional. Her brother Akira, older by 4 years, wasn't much different. Now studying at a prestigious university, he called even less than their parents. The two of them had never been close, their relationship marked by a quiet indifference. Akira was always busy, always focused on his academic pursuits, leaving little room for familial bonds. Akane sometimes wondered if the detachment ran in the family, an unspoken trait passed down like an inherited heirloom. A buzzing alarm on her smartphone reminded her that it was time to head to school. Finishing up what was left of her breakfast, Akane stood from her place at the dining table, a hired housekeeper cleaning up after her. Saying farewell to the staff attending her, Akane rushed out to her family's driver, onwards to school. Time: 8 a.m. on the dot. Location: school. Date: Friday, a chilly day in November. By the time she arrived at school, Akane had pushed her thoughts on her family aside. The strict schedules and endless expectations of her high school life didn't leave much room for introspection. She immersed herself in her studies, acing a morning math test with practiced ease. During lunch, she sat with her usual group of friends, joining their conversations about celebrities, upcoming exams, and trivial gossip. She smiled and laughed when appropriate, but her mind remained elsewhere. Her classmates admired her, envied her, even idolized her, but none of them truly knew her. Not the real Akane, the one who yearned for something more meaningful than the hollow routines of her daily life. She noticed that Minoru wasn't here today either. She would say this was unusual, but the boy that was her neighbor in homeroom wasn't exactly the most stellar when it came to coming to school. He was good at school when he was here though, which made her wonder if he was a genius who hated school or a delinquent who happened to be book smart. When she thought about it, this would make him average. Good enough schoolwork and having just bad enough truancy canceled each other out, making him an average schoolboy statistic-wise. Of course, Akane pondered, this wouldn't make any university admit him with open arms, unless he was a certified genius and something they couldn't do without. Unless he was a scholar or a super athlete, she doubted any prestigious university would scout him. The bell rang. She had her part to play as the class representative now. Time: 3 p.m., end of school day. Location: front of school. Date: Friday, day finally warmed up in November. Once classes ended, Akane changed into a casual yet elegant outfit for her afternoon commitments. Being a rising teen actress came with its own set of challenges, but she had learned to navigate them with a blend of professionalism and charm. The car ride to the television studio was uneventful, the streets bustling with the usual chaos of Tokyo's rush hour. Akane stared out the window, her thoughts drifting. Despite the success she had achieved, a part of her felt incomplete. She couldn't pinpoint the source of the emptiness, but it lingered like a shadow, always present, always out of reach. The day took an unexpected turn just as Akane stepped out of the studio. The ground trembled beneath her feet, the vibrations faint at first but quickly growing in intensity. Her heart raced as she clutched the side of a parked car for support. Around her, people screamed, and glass shattered as the earthquake tore through the city. The air filled with an ominous rumble, and in the distance Akane saw a strange, faintly glowing light, a surreal purple hue that flickered on the horizon. Her first thought was of her parents and brother. Were they safe? The answer came almost immediately. Her parents were overseas, far from the quake's epicenter, and Akira was at his university, also likely unaffected. And yet, the thought of them stirred little more than a fleeting concern. She realized with a pang of guilt how emotionally distant they had become. Time, 5 p.m. after her acting job ended for the day. Location, Tokyo streets, currently disarrayed. Date, Friday, day is chilling again. The journey home was slow and tense. Akane's driver navigated through streets choked with debris and panicked civilians. The radio crackled with reports of the earthquake's aftermath, but there was no mention of the strange light Akane had seen. When they finally reached her neighborhood, Akane felt a momentary relief. Her house stood untouched, a stark contrast to the destruction she had witnessed elsewhere. But that relief was short-lived. A strange feeling prickled at the back of her neck as she stepped out of the car. Something was off, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As she walked toward her front door, her gaze was drawn to the abandoned construction site nearby. A faint silhouette stood amidst the wreckage, barely visible in the dim light of the setting sun. Akane's breath caught in her throat. A familiar figure was nearby, his jacket hoodie off from his head, leaving his head exposed to the cool air. He didn't look too good. His body was spasming way too quickly for her to not be concerned about him. "Minoru," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't believe it was him, but the figure looked remarkably like him. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the site, her heart pounding. Ignoring her driver's panicked plea for her to come back, she made her way to him. The figure became clearer as she approached. A boy, slumped against a pile of broken beams and scattered debris. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his face pale. "Minoru," she called out, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. "Akane." His voice was weak, a mere whisper. Tears welled in her eyes as she took in his battered form. Memories of their past encounters flooded her mind, how he had saved her from kidnappers, how he had always seemed unshakable. Seeing him like this was almost unbearable. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You look like you've been through hell." Minoru didn't answer immediately. His head lolled to the side, his breathing shallow. A burst of panic tried to set into Akane, but she brushed it off. Her adrenaline pumping in her body stopped any sort of panic setting in. Instead, determination set in. "Don't worry," Akane said firmly, brushing away her tears. "I'll get you out of here. Just hang on." She slipped an arm around his shoulders, helping him to his feet. It wasn't easy. Minoru was heavier than he looked, and Akane wasn't exactly strong. But determination drove her forward. The journey back to her house was grueling, each step a struggle as she half-dragged, half-carried Minoru through the quiet streets. Her arms trembled with effort, but she refused to stop. By the time they reached her door, she was on the verge of collapse. Somehow, she managed to get him inside and into one of the guest bedrooms. She laid him down carefully, her chest heaving from exertion. She noted that none of the staff was around, but she figured they left for the day, their contract fulfilled. No worries, she could do this. As she looked at him, battered yet alive, a thought crossed her mind, a mix of relief and fear. Whatever had brought him to this state, it wasn't over. For now, though, he needed rest. And Akane was determined to protect him, no matter the cost. Time, unknown, approximately early to late evening. Location, Akane's home. Date, Friday, chilly night in November. Akane sat on the edge of the guest bed, her hands trembling as she watched Minoru's shallow breathing. His battered body lay on the soft mattress, a sharp contrast to the pristine sheets. The stark whiteness of the room seemed to amplify the bloodstains on his torn clothing. She had done it, she'd gotten him back to her house barely, but now came the harder part. Minoru wasn't just exhausted, he was hurt and badly so. Her chest tightened at the sight of him in this vulnerable state, so unlike the figure of strength she had always known. Her mind raced with what to do next. She wasn't a medic, but she knew a few things. Her older brother, Akira, was in med school and had often come home ranting about his coursework. Over time she'd picked up snippets, mostly unwillingly, about how to deal with injuries. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Akane stepped into her in-suit bathroom, grabbing supplies, a first aid kit, warm water and clean towels. As she returned to the guest room, she hesitated, her eyes falling on Minoru's tattered clothes. She couldn't tend to his wounds with him still wearing those. Her cheeks flushed as the realization sank in. "Oh no," she muttered under her breath. Taking a deep breath, she moved closer, trying to focus on the task at hand. Gently, she started with his jacket, carefully peeling it off his arms to avoid aggravating any unseen injuries. His shirt came next, or what was left of it. It was practically in shreds. Her face burned as she saw the bruises and cuts that marred his torso. "Focus, Akane," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't about you." The worst wound was a deep gash on his side, just below his ribs. Blood had soaked through the fabric, the dried crimson crusting over the tear in his skin. Akane winced at the sight, her stomach churning, but she forced herself to stay calm. It looked like a bullet grazed him, and it was cauterized haphazardly. She cleaned the wound with the warm water, working carefully to avoid causing him further pain. He flinched slightly in his unconscious state, and she froze, waiting to see if he would wake. When he did not, she continued, applying antiseptic and bandaging the injury as securely as she could. With the worst of his injuries addressed, but his clothes were beyond saving. Akane looked at the ruined fabric with a mix of frustration and embarrassment. She couldn't leave him in them, not like this. Her mind darted to her brother's room. Akira's old clothes. He hadn't stayed here in years, but his belongings were still in his closet. A quick trip upstairs later, Akane returned with a set of loose pajamas, faded but clean. She set them on the bed and glanced back at Minoru. "I guess I have no choice," she muttered, though her voice sounded more like she was trying to convince herself. Her hands hovered over the waistband of his pants, her cheeks flaming red. "It's just clothes," she told herself. "Just like a mannequin, or a doll." Gingerly, she worked to remove his remaining clothing. Each movement felt excruciatingly slow, her nerves on edge the entire time. When she finally managed to get him fully dressed in Akira's old pajamas, she let out a long breath of relief, slumping back in the chair by the bed. Her gaze fell on Minoru's peaceful face. He looked so different now, so vulnerable. Her heart ached at the thought of how much he must have gone through to end up here. Satisfied that he was at least physically cared for, Akane turned her attention to his belongings. His torn clothing, bloodied and dirted, was set aside for disposal. She folded what little of his gear remained intact, placing it neatly on the nightstand. She pulled the blanket over him, tucking him in gently, and sat back to observe her work. For the first time since finding him at the construction site, she allowed herself to breathe. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. Akane glanced at her phone, debating whether to call someone. Her parents, her brother, maybe even the police. But something stopped her. This wasn't just about Minoru's injuries. Whatever had happened to him was far bigger than she could comprehend. Her mind wandered to the strange purple light she had seen earlier. The earthquake, the explosion, were they all connected to him? She sat by his bedside for hours, her thoughts a chaotic whirl. Occasionally Minoru stirred, mumbling incoherent words in his sleep. Akane leaned in close, catching snippets, names, places, fragments of a story she couldn't piece together. As the night wore on, her exhaustion caught up with her. She rested her head on the edge of the bed, her fingers lightly clutching the blanket. "I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Minoru," she murmured, her eyes heavy with sleep. "But you're not facing it alone. Not anymore." The image of her parents flickered in her mind, her mother and father, distant as ever, absorbed in their overseas ventures. Would they even care if they knew what was happening? Her relationship with them felt like an empty shell, all surface and no substance. And her brother Akira, always the prodigy, always so consumed with his studies. He would probably scold her for getting involved, tell her she was being reckless. But then again, he wasn't here. None of them were. It was just her and Minoru in this vast, empty house. A faint smile touched her lips as she thought about the boy lying before her. Minoru wasn't perfect. He could be aloof, guarded, and frustratingly enigmatic. But he had always been there for her, even when no one else was. Now it was her turn. Before drifting off to sleep, Akane reached out and placed a hand on Minoru's, a silent promise that she would do whatever it took to help him. The night was still, the faint hum of Tokyo's distant chaos the only sound. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Akane knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let Minoru face them alone. Time, unknown. Location, unknown. Date, unknown. Minoru stood in a void, a space filled with a pale, shifting light. It was neither night nor day, just an endless, oppressive twilight. Before him, Umbra 03 drifted slowly, its small form moving just out of reach. Wait. Minoru's voice echoed unnaturally, distorted in the silence. He broke into a sprint, the ground beneath him soft and uneven, as though he were running through a dreamscape of thick, invisible sand. Umbra 03 didn't respond, its circular body pulsing faintly with light as it floated further away. "You can't go," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of its metallic frame, but it slipped from his grasp. His legs burned with effort, his lungs heaving, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't lose it again. The light from Umbra 03 grew brighter, illuminating the space around him, and suddenly the emptiness transformed. He found himself back at the ruins of the cult's facility. The crumbled walls loomed over him, twisted metal and shattered stone forming a chaotic landscape. Purple energy crackled in the air, and the distant hum of the unstable core resonated in his ears. They were leaving the ruins, dodging gunfire from the cult and running to escape Olivier's relentless pursuit. Umbra 03 floated in front of him, its frame sparking, its movements erratic. "No," Minoru whispered, his heart sinking. The final moment came, the one he had tried to suppress. Umbra 03's small body detonated from a burst of gunfire, hiding a well-aimed sniper round and energy, the force throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, his vision blurred by the light of the explosion. He lay there, staring up at the fractured sky, unable to move. As the chaos faded, a figure emerged from the glow, a spectral image of Aurora, her translucent form walking through the ruins as though untouched by the destruction. She was not the hybridized abomination chained by the cult. Instead, she was radiant, her long hair flowing like liquid starlight, her eyes piercing and sorrowful. Aurora knelt beside him, her gaze soft but filled with a strange intensity. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered, her voice carrying a melodic quality that resonated in his chest. Minoru tried to move, to speak, but he was paralyzed, trapped within his broken body. Aurora extended a hand, her palm resting against his chest, and he felt a rush of warmth, a surge of energy that filled him to the core. "This isn't just power," she said, her voice echoing. "It's a responsibility. To stand against them. To protect what they would destroy." Her form began to dissolve into light, her essence flowing into him. He wanted to resist, to ask questions, to demand answers, but there was no time. "Live," was her final word before she vanished entirely, leaving him alone in the void once more. As the ruins faded, Minoru found himself standing on a featureless plain, a vast expanse of gray that stretched endlessly in every direction. A faint wind whispered through the space, carrying with it an uneasy tension. Ahead of him stood Olivier. She was dressed in her battle attire, her long knife gleaming in the dim light. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes locked onto his. There were no words, no preamble. She raised her blade, and he instinctively raised his baton, the two of them stepping into a silent stance. The fight began. Olivier moved like a shadow, her attacks swift and precise. Minoru countered with equal intensity, the baton in his hand moving faster than he thought possible. He could feel the strange energy within him, Aurora's power coursing through his veins, heightening his reflexes, sharpening his senses. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying with each impact. Each strike from Olivier was calculated, meant to exploit a weakness, but Minoru matched her blow for blow. As they fought, flashes of memories, not his own, flickered through his mind. He saw visions of a girl much like Olivier standing in a lush garden, laughing. He saw her face streaked with tears as she knelt before a shattered monument. Olivier faltered for a moment, her movements slowing as a similar confusion seemed to grip her. Her eyes widened as though she, too, was seeing something that didn't belong to her. Their duel became a strange, almost synchronized dance, both lost in a haze of overlapping memories and emotions. The fight ended abruptly. The gray plain disintegrated around them, fragments of the dreamscape falling away like ash. Minoru felt himself being pulled upward, the weight of the dream lifting from his chest. He opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the soft glow of a lamp, its warm light illuminating the guest room. His body ached, his wounds reminding him of the reality he had returned to. He turned his head slightly and saw Akane. She was seated in a chair beside the bed, her head resting on her folded arms, her breathing slow and steady. She had fallen asleep while keeping watch over him. For a moment, Minoru simply stared at her, his mind still clouded by the remnants of the dream. The sight of her, so peaceful, so unaware of the chaos he carried, brought a strange sense of calm. But it was fleeting. The memories of the ruins, of Aurora, of Olivier came rushing back. He clenched his fists, a determined look forming on his face. "I won't let it end like this," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Akane stirred slightly at the sound, but she didn't wake. Minoru allowed himself one more moment of rest, knowing that the path ahead would be anything but easy. The soft glow of the lamp seemed to dim as Minoru lay back against the pillow, the ache in his body ebbing and flowing like a tide. The dream he had just emerged from clung to him, vivid and unrelenting. His fingers twitched involuntarily as he recalled the desperate chase after Umbra 03 and the strange, spectral form of Aurora. Her words repeated in his mind as if etched into his very being, "This isn't just power. It's a responsibility. Responsibility." The word resonated deeper than it should have, filling him with both determination and a lingering sense of unease. He rubbed his temples, trying to piece together the fragments of the dream. What did he get himself into? He finally asked himself. He was just a nobody. A nobody who wanted to rule the world from the shadows, sure, but just a nobody. No. He is now some champion of some long-forgotten past against a who knows how many millennia-old cult of fanatics who have some very scary women assassins and guns. Lots and lots of guns. This was awesome. The cult of Diabolos. The name was new to him, but their methods were not. They were shadowy, ruthless, and terrifyingly advanced. The files he managed to decrypt hinted at projects that bordered on the supernatural. Experiments with forbidden technology, attempts to harness powers beyond human comprehension, and whispers of something ancient stirring beneath it all. Yet, as he leaned back in bed, letting the enormity of it all settle in, he felt something unexpected rise within him. Exhilaration. Minoru had always sought challenges. As a child, he devoured stories of heroes and villains, of battles waged against impossible odds. Growing up, he trained himself relentlessly, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. He dreamed of becoming someone extraordinary, someone who could face anything and emerge victorious. And now here it was. The cult wasn't just another gang of thugs or corrupt officials. They were an ancient, organized force, wielding technology so advanced it seemed indistinguishable from magic. They had secrets buried so deep that even their fragmented remnants were enough to send shivers down the spine of any ordinary person. But Minoru wasn't ordinary. His fingers drummed against the table as he stared at the screen, a small smile creeping across his face. "This is it," he murmured to himself. "This is the kind of enemy I've been waiting for." And then there was her. Olivier. The data files had only a few mentions of her, but even those were enough to paint a vivid picture. She wasn't just an operative of the cult, she was their top assassin, a woman whose precision and lethality were the stuff of legend. One document described her as a shadow-given form, bound to the will of the elders. Another simply referred to her as Umbra's Fong. Minoru had faced skilled opponents before, but none like her. Their brief encounter at the ruins had shown him that much. She moved with an almost inhuman grace, her strikes honed to perfection. Every clash of his baton against her knife against his baton had sent shockwaves through his arms, not just from the physical impact but from the realization that she was better, faster, stronger. For most, that realization would have been terrifying. For Minoru it was electrifying. "She's dangerous," he muttered, leaning forward as his thoughts raced. But that's what makes it interesting. It wasn't just her skill that fascinated him. It was her resolve, the quiet intensity in her eyes. She wasn't some mindless killer, she was a force of nature, a storm with a purpose. And deep down, Minoru knew that facing her again would push him to his limits, and maybe even beyond them. The more he thought about it, the more his heart raced. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a test, a chance to prove himself against an enemy that was everything he had ever dreamed of facing. The cult's terrifying technology? It only added to the stakes. The ancient, cryptic forces they were trying to awaken? That was just the backdrop to the real challenge. Minoru didn't fear the cult. He welcomed them. His mind buzzed with plans and strategies. He thought of ways to counter their weapons, to exploit their weaknesses. He envisioned scenarios where he would outmaneuver Olivier, where he would turn her own precision against her. And somewhere in the depths of his mind he acknowledged the risk. He might not win. He might not survive. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the fight itself, the thrill of standing against something so vast, so incomprehensibly powerful, and daring to challenge it. The cult thought they were untouchable. Olivier thought she was unstoppable. But they hadn't faced him yet. Not at his fullest. And he couldn't wait to prove them wrong. But first, Minoru let out a slow breath, trying to piece together the events that led him here. He remembered the ruins, the explosion, and collapsing at the construction site. Everything after that was a blur. His gaze shifted to Akane. She looked peaceful, a stark contrast to how he felt inside. He noticed a faint smudge of dirt on her cheek and the way her clothes were slightly wrinkled, as if she hadn't taken time for herself in hours. She brought me here, he realized. The thought brought a pang of guilt. Akane shouldn't have been involved in any of this. Yet here she was, watching over him, her concern evident even in sleep. As he adjusted his position, a soft clink caught his attention. On the bedside table lay a neatly folded shirt and pants that weren't his. He glanced down at himself and realized he was already wearing unfamiliar clothing, comfortable and slightly loose but clean. His face warmed slightly at the realization. The movement must have stirred Akane, because she shifted in her sleep, her brow furrowing slightly before her eyes fluttered open. For a moment she looked disoriented, her gaze unfocused. Then she saw Minoru sitting up, and her expression shifted to relief. "You're awake," she said softly, her voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and happiness. "Yeah," Minoru replied, his voice rough. He cleared his throat. "Thanks for, well, everything." Akane sat up straighter, brushing her hair out of her face. "You scared me, you know. I thought you were." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind. Are you feeling okay? Does anything hurt?" Minoru gave a small nod. "I'm fine. Just a bit sore." "You should still take it easy," she said, her tone firm. "You were in really bad shape when I found you. I had to, well, clean you up and treat your wounds." Minoru raised an eyebrow. "Clean me up?" Akane's cheeks turned a faint shade of pink. She looked away, focusing intently on the blanket. "You were covered in dirt and blood. I couldn't just leave you like that." "Thanks," he said again, his voice softer this time. Akane stood and moved to a small table in the corner of the room. It was cluttered with a first aid kit, a bowl of water, and some neatly folded cloths. She returned to his side with a damp cloth, kneeling beside the bed. "You still have a few scrapes that need cleaning," she said, her tone businesslike. Minoru opened his mouth to protest, but the look she gave him silenced him. He sighed and relented, letting her dab at a small cut on his cheek. "You're pretty good at this," he remarked. Akane gave a small shrug. "My brother, Akira, used to get into fights a lot when we were younger. I picked up a few things taking care of him." "Akira, huh?" Minoru asked, trying to distract himself from the stinging sensation. "He's away at university now," Akane said, her voice tinged with a hint of bitterness. "We don't talk much anymore. He's busy." Minoru noted the way her hands tightened slightly around the cloth. He didn't press further. When Akane finished tending to his wounds, she stood and stretched, letting out a small yawn. "You should try to eat something," she said, glancing at him. "I'll make some soup. It's nothing fancy, but it'll help you get your strength back." "Thanks," Minoru said, watching as she left the room. He leaned back against the pillows, staring up at the ceiling. His body still felt heavy, but there was a new warmth in his chest, not from Aurora's power, but from something simpler. The aroma of cooking filled the air as Minoru made his way to the kitchen. He leaned against the doorway watching Akane work. She moved with quiet efficiency, stirring a pot on the stove while occasionally checking a bowl of chopped vegetables on the counter. "You know," Minoru said, breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever seen you cook before." Akane jumped slightly, nearly dropping the spoon she was holding. She turned to face him, her cheeks flushing. "Don't sneak up on me like that," she said, her tone a mix of annoyance and embarrassment. "Sorry," Minoru said, smirking. "Didn't mean to scare you." Akane huffed and turned back to the stove. "You should be resting." "I feel better," he said, stepping into the kitchen. "Besides, I couldn't resist the smell." "What's on the menu?" "Miso soup and rice," she replied. "It's simple, but it's all I could manage on short notice." "It smells great," Minoru said, sitting down at the small table. They ate in comfortable silence, the warmth of the food filling the room. "This is really good," Minoru said, breaking the quiet. "Thanks," Akane said, her voice soft. She looked down at her bowl, her expression thoughtful. "You know, you're the first person I've cooked for in a long time." Minoru raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She nodded. "My parents are always away on business, and Akira, well, he's not around anymore either. It's just me most of the time." Minoru frowned. "That sounds lonely." Akane gave a small shrug, trying to play it off. "I'm used to it." Minoru didn't say anything, but he made a mental note of her words. As the evening wore on, they found themselves back in the living room, the warmth of the meal lingering between them. Minoru's mind drifted to the dream again, to the responsibility that Aurora had left him with. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't stay here forever. "Thanks, Akane," he said, his voice quiet. She looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't have to thank me. I didn't want to lose you." Her words hung in the air, unspoken emotions passing between them. Extra chapter. How did these two meet again? Let's roll back the clock a bit around the time Akane met Minoru. Time, 12:30 p.m. Location, school main hallway. Date, a cheery warm day in spring March. The schoolyard buzzed with the familiar energy of another day. Students shuffled through the hallways, their chatter echoing against the pristine walls. Among them, Minoru Kageno strolled with his usual nonchalance, his bag slung lazily over one shoulder. His sharp eyes scanned the crowd, uninterested in anything specific, until a sudden voice broke through his thoughts. "Minoru Kageno, right?" He stopped, turning toward the sound. A girl stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, her posture timid but determined. She had long dark hair that fell neatly past her shoulders, framing a face that seemed vaguely familiar. Her uniform was immaculate, her presence exuding a quiet grace. "Yes," Minoru replied, raising an eyebrow. "I'm Akane Nishino," she said, her voice steady but polite. "I'm in Class 2B. We've crossed paths before, but I don't think we've properly introduced ourselves." Minoru frowned slightly, tilting his head. "Nishimiya? Nishikawa? Nishida?" Akane's brow twitched, a faint flush rising to her cheeks. "It's Nishino," she repeated, her voice firmer. "Right, Nishino." Minoru waved a hand dismissively, already turning to leave. "Got it." "Wait a second." Akane's voice sharpened, making him pause. "That's it? You can't even remember my name?" "I did just now, didn't I?" Minoru said, glancing back at her. "Anyway, nice meeting you, Nishino, or whoever." Without waiting for her response, he continued down the hall, leaving Akane staring after him, her fists clenching at her sides. From that day on, Akane couldn't decide whether Minoru Kageno was oblivious or intentionally infuriating. He had a way of always seeming aloof, even when directly addressed. Whenever their paths crossed, he would nod in acknowledgement, but never more than that. Worse, he kept getting her name wrong. Nishiyama? Nishitani? Nish, something? Each misstep chipped away at her patience. She tried to focus on her studies, her part-time acting career, and her life outside of school, but somehow Minoru's dismissive attitude lingered in the back of her mind. Why couldn't he just remember her name? Time, 7 p.m. Tokyo time. Location, school parking lot. Date, one warm dusk in August, almost the turn to fall. One late afternoon as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the streets in shades of orange and pink, Akane walked briskly toward her family's car. She had stayed late at school for an acting rehearsal and was eager to get home. Her steps quickened when she noticed two men lingering near the parking lot, their expressions too casual to be natural. Akane's heart skipped a beat as they glanced her way and began to approach. "Hey there, Missy," one of them said, his grin wide and unsettling. "You're Nishino, right? The actress? Must be nice having a family with deep pockets." Akane froze, her grip tightening on her bag. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, nothing much," the other man said, his voice slick with mock innocence. "Just a little donation. Your folks won't mind, right?" Before she could respond, one of them grabbed her arm. She yelped, struggling against his grip, but he was too strong. They dragged her toward a van parked nearby, with two others nearby keeping watch, ignoring her cries for help. Inside the van, Akane sat bound and seething, her mind racing. The two men sat across from her, chatting like they didn't have a care in the world. "Did you hear about that guy running around at night?" one of them asked, lighting a cigarette. "The freak with the crowbar and baton?" "Yeah, I heard. Beats up punks for fun." "Think he'll come after us?" the first man asked with a chuckle. "Nah, we're too smart for that. Guy only goes after low-level trash. We're professionals." They seemed so sure of that too. Akane felt the cold, rough texture of the rope biting into her wrists as the van jolted over potholes, its wheels splashing through murky puddles. She struggled against her restraints, her mind racing with panic and anger. The two men sitting across from her paid no attention to her efforts, their conversation punctuated with smug chuckles. "Keep squirming, princess. one of them said with a grin. Doesn't matter how hard you try. No one's coming for you. Yeah, the other added, his voice dripping with mockery. Your parents will pay up and then we'll leave you somewhere nice and cozy. Nothing personal, just business. Akane glared at them, her heart pounding. Her parents. She hadn't seen them in months. They were always abroad, handling their high-profile careers. She doubted they'd even notice her missing until someone informed them. The thought stung, but she shoved it aside, focusing on the rhythmic sound of the van's tires. She memorized every turn the vehicle made, every bump in the road. A part of her clung to the hope that she'd get a chance to escape, or that someone might find her. The van slowed, its headlights cutting through the foggy air as it approached the bay. A derelict warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted exterior blending into the shadowy landscape. The salty tang of the sea wafted through the open windows, mingling with the scent of oil and decay. One of the kidnappers jumped out of the van, slamming the door shut behind him. Bring her inside, he barked to his partner. The second man yanked Akane to her feet, dragging her out of the van. She stumbled, her shoes scraping against the uneven pavement. Her captors marched her toward the warehouse, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Inside, the warehouse was as decrepit as its exterior. Crates and rusted machinery were scattered haphazardly, and a few bare light bulbs flickered above, casting eerie shadows across the walls. They shoved her into a chair in the center of the room, tying her wrists and ankles tightly. She winced as the ropes cut into her skin, but her glare didn't waver. Stay put, one of the men said, grinning. Not like you've got much choice. The other laughed, pulling out his phone. Time to make the call. Let's see how much her folks value their precious little actress. As one of the men dialed, the other began pacing, his fingers fidgeting with a cigarette. As if to relieve the boredom, the other two goons nearby Akane struck up a familiar conversation. You hear about that guy running around lately? The one with the mask. The vigilante? The man on the phone asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah. Freak with a crowbar and a baton. Keeps smashing up gangs like it's a hobby. Word is he's been seen near the docks. Relax, the first man scoffed, shaking his head. Even if he's real, he's not coming here. This place is off the radar. Akane's heart skipped a beat, hope flickering in her chest. Could it be true? Was someone out there who might come for her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound, soft at first but growing louder. It was the metallic clang of something hitting the floor. What was that? One of the men muttered, spinning toward the source of the noise. Probably a rat, the other replied dismissively. This place is crawling with them. But the noise came again, closer this time. The man with the cigarette flicked it onto the ground, stamping it out. I'll check it out, he said, pulling out a pipe from a nearby crate. The man ventured into the shadows, his footsteps hesitant. The faint glow from the light bulbs barely reached the far corners of the warehouse, leaving much of it cloaked in darkness. Hello, he called out, his voice wavering. Anyone there? Silence. He took another step forward and then another. His grip tightened on the pipe as his eyes darted around nervously. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, moving with fluid precision. A crowbar swung upward, striking the man's hand and sending the pipe clattering to the ground. The man screamed, clutching his wrist, but the figure didn't stop. A baton struck his leg and he collapsed to the floor with a pained groan. Back near Akane, the second man tensed at the sound of the struggle. He dropped his phone and grabbed a knife from his pocket, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Who's there? He shouted, his voice trembling. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a masked face, its eyes cold and calculating. Who the hell are you? The man demanded, raising the knife. Two other men also held their pocket knives in what they thought was a threatening manner. The masked figure didn't reply. Instead, he moved swiftly, dodging the man's wild swing and disarming him with a well-placed strike. The knife clattered to the floor and the man stumbled back, clutching his side. The other two kidnappers, like the cowards they were, ran out of the warehouse, probably to get back up and beat this hero to the ground. Akane watched in awe and disbelief as the masked vigilante turned toward her. The figure knelt, cutting the ropes around her wrists and ankles with practiced efficiency. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice low and even. Akane shook her head, her voice caught in her throat. Then go, he said, helping her to her feet. She hesitated, her legs shaky. But, go, he repeated, his tone firm. You don't want to be here when more of them show up. Gathering her strength, Akane stumbled toward the exit. When she reached the doorway, she glanced back. The masked vigilante was gone, leaving only the two unconscious men sprawled on the warehouse floor. The walk home was a blur for Akane, her thoughts racing. The image of the masked figure stayed with her. The sharp eyes, the precise movements, the unmistakable aura of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Could it have been Minoru? The thought seemed ridiculous, yet she couldn't shake it. His voice, his height, even the way he moved, it all felt familiar. But if it was him, why would he hide his identity? And how had he even known where to find her? As she slipped into her house, exhaustion washing over her, one thing became clear. Whoever the masked vigilante was, he wasn't just a shadow in the night. He was someone who had crossed into her life for a reason, even if that reason remained shrouded in mystery. And for now, that shadow lingered, a silent guardian watching from the darkness. The warehouse incident left an indelible mark on Akane Nishino. She couldn't forget the masked figure who had rescued her with such effortless precision. Despite her initial doubts, she couldn't shake the feeling that it had been Minoru. The following days were a haze of anxiety and determination. Sleep was elusive as her mind replayed the events over and over, the cold ropes biting into her wrists, the metallic clangs echoing through the dark, and the figure moving like a shadow through the chaos. School, acting, and even her tenuous relationship with her family faded into the background. She found herself replaying old memories, moments when Minoru had been around but always distant. His reserved nature had often left her wondering what lay behind his quiet demeanor, but now she felt as if she glimpsed a part of him he never wanted anyone to see. It wasn't enough to wonder. She had to know. After days of internal debate, Akane finally decided to seek him out. The problem was, Minoru wasn't exactly easy to find. He had no social media presence, and his sparse interactions at school gave her little to go on. But she remembered the last place she'd seen him before everything had changed, the old construction site. It was rumored to be an up-and-coming middle-class area, but plans didn't pan out, sadly. Talks of it being converted to storage areas were the local gossip. The site was a short walk from her house, but the journey felt much longer. Each step was heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. What would she say to him? Would he even acknowledge her? When she arrived, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and concrete dust. The skeletal frame of the half-built house loomed ahead, its structure a silent monument to plans that had stalled. And there he was. Minoru sat on a pile of concrete blocks, his figure outlined against the fading light of the late afternoon. He was dressed simply, his usual hoodie and jeans, but his posture was different. There was a tension in his shoulders, a weariness in the way he held himself. Akane hesitated, unsure of how to approach him. Her heart raced as she took a step closer, her shadow falling across the uneven ground. "You're here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Minoru looked up, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might brush her off as he often did with most people. But then, to her surprise, he nodded. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and even. The question caught her off guard. She had spent so much time thinking about him, wondering if he was okay, that she hadn't expected him to ask about her. I think so," she replied, her words faltering. "I mean, after everything." Minoru didn't respond immediately. He shifted slightly, patting the concrete block beside him in a silent invitation. Akane sat down, the rough surface cold against her legs. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, though, it was almost comforting, like an unspoken understanding between them. As the minutes stretched on, Akane found herself studying him. The way he sat, the way his hands rested on his knees, it all seemed so familiar. And then it hit her. "It was you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Minoru stiffened slightly but didn't look at her. "You saved me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "At the warehouse. It was you, wasn't it?" For a moment she thought he might deny it. But then he let out a quiet sigh, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Akane felt a surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Why?" Minoru finally turned to look at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Because I could," he said simply. It wasn't the answer she had expected, but somehow, it felt right. They didn't talk much after that. Instead, they sat together, the silence between them speaking volumes. Akane found herself relaxing in his presence, the tension that had gripped her since the kidnapping slowly ebbing away. Over the next few days, she returned to the construction site whenever she had free time. Minoru was always there, usually tinkering with something, a small mechanical device, a piece of discarded machinery, anything he could get his hands on. At first, their interactions were limited to simple exchanges, a nod of acknowledgement, a brief greeting. but gradually the distance between them began to shrink. Akane started bringing him small things: a thermos of tea, a sandwich, a notebook. Minoru never asked for anything, but he accepted her offerings with quiet gratitude. One afternoon, as she handed him a bottle of water, he finally got her name right. "Thanks, Nishino," he said, his tone casual. She froze, the bottle still in her hand. It was the first time he had ever said her name correctly. "You remembered," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. Minoru shrugged, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess it finally stuck." Akane couldn't help but laugh, the sound light and genuine. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of normalcy, something steady in the chaos of her life. Their connection wasn't built on grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was in the small things: the quiet companionship, the shared understanding, the unspoken promise of safety. For Akane, Minoru became a safe harbor, a place where she could let her guard down, even if only for a little while. And for Minoru, Akane was a reminder that, despite everything, there was still something worth protecting. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger. They didn't need words to communicate; their presence alone was enough. And though Minoru would never admit it, Akane's unwavering determination to stay by his side began to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. In the shadows of the abandoned construction site, the place where his future backup workshop would be someday, two lives that had once been worlds apart began to intertwine, creating something neither of them had expected but both desperately needed. For now, they weren't hunted or haunted either by the past or the shadows. For now. Date: approximately 1 month after Minoru's recovery began. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet city streets. Akane Nishino walked silently beside Minoru, the two of them taking an aimless route through the back alleys that had become their favored retreat. A month had passed since she had found him at the abandoned construction site, beaten and barely alive. In that time, their routines had fallen into a semblance of normalcy, if normal could ever describe the life they now led. Minoru had regained his strength, the sharp glint of determination back in his eyes. The faint scars on his face and body served as a reminder of the battle he had barely survived, but they seemed to energize him rather than weigh him down. He carried himself with purpose, and Akane could feel the tension in the air every time his gaze grew distant. She knew he was planning his next move. But tonight something felt different. Akane's chest tightened as she glanced at Minoru. He looked as calm as ever, his sharp features illuminated by the dim glow of streetlights. She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed her every time. How could she even begin to express the tangle of emotions she felt? Gratitude, fear, admiration. Something deeper she couldn't quite put into words. They arrived at a quiet park, the kind she used to visit with her family before life became so complicated. Minoru found a bench and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, deep in thought. Akane hesitated, then sat beside him. "You've been awfully quiet tonight," she ventured, hoping to break the silence. Minoru glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Just thinking." "About what?" "The cult," he said simply. Akane sighed. She had known the answer before she asked the question. "You're going after them again, aren't you?" Minoru nodded. "It's time." Minoru sat in Akane's dimly lit garage, its once pristine space now cluttered with salvaged equipment and scattered tools. A faint hum from a jury-rigged power source provided the only noise aside from the distant chirping of cicadas. His mind was a battlefield, torn between the memories of past failures and the determination to finish what he started. The cult had taken everything: Aurora's freedom, Umbra 03, his sense of safety, and nearly his life. But he wasn't done. Not yet. The scars on his body, still faintly glowing from Aurora's touch, reminded him of the power she had given him. A double-edged gift that had saved him and might yet kill him. Still, to strike at the cult's heart, he needed more than conviction. He needed gear. His first attempt to rebuild his arsenal began with a trip to a scrapyard on the edge of town. It wasn't his first choice, but resources were scarce and the cult's influence had grown. Shops that once sold advanced tech were under surveillance, leaving him to pick through piles of rusted metal and outdated circuitry. Minoru wandered between mountains of discarded appliances, his discerning eyes scanning for anything salvageable. Outdated processors, fried circuit boards. "Why do I feel like I'm dumpster diving for a dream?" he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. Eventually he found a few items: a broken drone chassis, a half-functioning micro-camera, and what he hoped was a salvageable power core. He stuffed the items into his pack, avoiding the gaze of the scrapyard's proprietor. Back at the garage, he laid out his findings on a table, the harsh light of a desk lamp illuminating the cobbled-together components. He frowned. Umbra 03 could have assembled a reconnaissance unit in minutes, he thought bitterly. His tools felt clumsy in his hands compared to the intuitive interface Umbra had offered. Maybe he did get used to the ease of access the Umbra 03 provided when crafting his gear. Umbra 02 and Umbra 03 offered optimizations and alterations to some of the plans he made to gear, which helped immensely during the Mountain Complex raid. Nevertheless, Minoru worked late into the night, tinkering, soldering, and improvising. He managed to cobble together 6 small drones, ready for flight or ground work. They were far from perfect. One had a jittery flight pattern and the other's camera feed flickered intermittently, but they were functional. Not exactly military grade, but it'll do for recon, he muttered, testing their controls on a worn tablet. The drones wobbled into the air, bumping into the garage ceiling before stabilizing. Minoru couldn't help but chuckle. Baby steps. The next challenge was his suit. His old one had been damaged during the collapse of the ruins. Most of it was beyond repair, leaving him to start from scratch. He dug through Akane's storeroom, finding old sports pads, utility belts, and even a few fabric scraps. Using what he had, Minoru pieced together a rudimentary exosuit. Though exosuit was a little exaggerated, he layered lightweight plating over reinforced fabric for protection, ensuring mobility wasn't sacrificed. The hardest part was integrating power distribution for his gloves and boots. His gloves, once able to interface with his wrist interface and deliver shocking punches, lay inert and as useful as its original design, which was just a pair of fancy leather gloves. Speaking of his wrist computer, Minoru glanced at it before grimacing. It still worked, but it couldn't locate Umbra 03 or be able to be fine-tuned quickly, considering all the work it was set to beforehand. He could reprogram it if needed, but it would take too long for it fully integrate itself onto something he considered not worth reprogramming for. As he donned the suit, mostly to get a feel for any alterations, he felt a pang of disappointment. It lacked the seamless design of his original, but it was functional. And in this fight, function was all that mattered. Minoru stared at the pile of salvaged parts spread across the workbench in Akane's garage, a far cry from the cutting-edge equipment he had once wielded. A patchwork armor frame, broken battery packs, wiring harvested from defunct appliances, and a single glowing power core, the remnants of his old suit, his only connection to the precision and power he once commanded. Not exactly state-of-the-art, he muttered, his voice heavy with a mix of determination and exasperation. Akane appeared from the doorway, carrying a box filled with more supplies she'd dug up from her house. "Found these in one of my dad's old closets," she said, placing the box beside him. Inside were several weathered leather jackets, their surfaces cracked with age. "These'll do," Minoru said with a nod, inspecting the material. "Thanks." "They're not exactly Kevlar," Akane replied, watching him work. "But they're better than nothing." Minoru chuckled faintly. "At this point, I'm aiming for better than nothing." Minoru began to reinforce the armor frame by layering the leather over an old set of sports padding Akane had found earlier in her family's storage. He carefully stitched and bolted the pieces together, reinforcing the shoulders and chest with makeshift plating salvaged from scrap metal. It was far from elegant, but it offered enough protection to withstand light impacts. The core of his suit, its energy system, was another story. With his old power core damaged beyond conventional repair, Minoru had to improvise. He salvaged what he could, repurposing it into a compact, high-yield explosive. The faintly glowing explosive now rested in a reinforced casing on his belt, ready to serve as a critical part of his arsenal. He just didn't know where to use it. For power, he fashioned a series of single-use battery packs from scavenged power banks. Each pack held just enough charge for one action: a burst of speed, a short leap, or a brief shock from his gloves. He strapped the packs to his forearms, their exposed wires a reminder of their crude design. "Single-use everything," Minoru muttered as he tested the first pack. "Feels like I'm playing on hard mode." Next came upgrading the drones. Using what little he could scavenge, Minoru managed to assemble 2 small, clunky upgrades. Each was cobbled together from mismatched parts: old drone chassis clamps, scavenged diodes, and outdated micro-camera parts. They weren't weapons, but he managed to fit each with a diode laser, just strong enough to cut through wires or thin metal with time. He tested the first drone with the upgrades in the garage, watching as it wobbled unsteadily into the air before stabilizing. The laser flickered to life, cutting through a piece of spare wire on the workbench with agonizing slowness. "Not exactly a death ray," he remarked dryly. Akane leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "It's better than nothing," she said, echoing his earlier words. "Yeah, but better than nothing doesn't inspire much confidence," Minoru replied, smirking faintly. The second drone performed similarly, its camera feed grainy but functional. Minoru adjusted the controls on his makeshift tablet, programming basic flight paths and commands. They were rudimentary tools, but they'd have to do. He had to have faith in his skills that the other drones would have functioning upgrades and wouldn't short out at the last minute. As the night deepened, Minoru returned to the bench, a sense of incompleteness nagging at him. His suit and tools were ready, but he was missing one essential element: a reliable weapon. His old baton, the one that had served him so faithfully, had been damaged beyond functionality during the last encounter. He retrieved the broken baton from a corner of the garage, its once sleek frame now dented and cracked. The circuits inside were fried, but the structural integrity of the shaft was salvageable. With a sigh, he set to work. Using parts scavenged from Akane's parents' old electronics, he rewired the baton's core. The advanced technology was gone, replaced by a rudimentary mechanism powered by one of his single-use battery packs. The result wasn't elegant, but it worked. The baton now delivered a single, powerful electric shock, enough to stun or incapacitate an enemy. When he activated the baton for the first time, a satisfying crackle of energy arced along its length. Minoru allowed himself a small smile. "Welcome back, old friend," he murmured, spinning the weapon in his hand. Next, Minoru rummaged through the piles of tools Akane had gathered, his eyes landing on a rusted crowbar. He hefted it, feeling its weight and balance. It wasn't as versatile as his baton, but it was a solid backup, perfect for prying open doors, smashing obstacles, or delivering raw, unrelenting force when needed. "This'll do," he said, testing a few swings. The crowbar was heavy, but it felt reassuring in his grip. He slid it into a makeshift holster on his suit, the cold metal a reminder of its brutal simplicity. Aware that brute force alone wouldn't get him far, Minoru also prepared for stealth. From an old toolbox, he extracted a small set of lock-picking tools, rusty but functional. He tested them on a padlock he found in the garage, his fingers working deftly despite his inexperience. After several minutes, the lock clicked open. "Not bad," he muttered, sliding the tools into a pouch on his belt. Akane, who had been watching from the doorway, raised an eyebrow. "Planning a career as a burglar if this whole cult thing doesn't work out?" Minoru smirked faintly. "Only if the cult wipes out every other option." Her expression softened, though the worry in her eyes remained. "Just don't get caught, okay?" Finally, Minoru turned his attention to his disruptor. The device had once been his trump card, capable of disabling enemy tech in a wide radius. Now, with limited resources, he could only build a single-use version. He repurposed a compact power cell and wired it into a salvaged circuit board, encasing the fragile assembly in a protective shell made from an old lunchbox. Testing it was out of the question. If it failed, he'd lose the only edge he had against the cult's advanced technology. "One shot," he murmured, holding the device in his hands. "Better make it count." Akane approached, her expression hesitant. "You've done so much with so little," she said softly. "But, are you sure it's enough?" Minoru looked up at her, his eyes hard. "It has to be." As the final pieces of his preparation came together, Minoru allowed himself a moment to rest. He leaned against the workbench, surveying his makeshift arsenal. The suit, the drones, the disruptor, the explosive core, all of it felt like a patchwork solution to a problem far bigger than himself. Akane set down a plate of food beside him, her quiet support and anchor in the chaos. "You'll come back, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Minoru hesitated, his gaze distant. "I'll try," he said at last, though the weight of his mission left little room for certainty. Akane nodded, her expression a mix of determination and worry. "Then I'll hold you to that." Date: 1 week later. The soft patter of raindrops against Akane's window filled the otherwise quiet room. Minoru sat cross-legged on the floor, tinkering with one of his drones. Sparks danced as he adjusted the laser diode with the delicate precision of a surgeon. Across the room, Akane sat on the edge of her bed, watching him work. She had a notebook open, pretending to study, but her gaze kept darting toward him. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. "Hey, Minoru?" "Oh?" He didn't look up, his focus still on the drone. How do you fight?" That got his attention. He paused mid-adjustment and glanced up, his expression a mix of surprise and amusement. "Why do you ask?" Akane fidgeted with the edge of her notebook. "I've been thinking, after everything that's happened. You know, with the cult and the kidnappers before. I don't want to feel helpless again. She glanced down, her voice quieter. I want to be able to protect myself. Minoru leaned back, his gaze scrutinizing her for a moment. Then with a small shrug he said, sure. But fighting isn't just about throwing punches. It's about strategy, awareness, and control. Are you sure you're ready for that? Akane nodded, determination gleaming in her eyes. In the garage, Minoru had set up a makeshift training area. The floor was cleared of clutter, leaving enough space for movement. He'd brought down a couple of padded cushions to serve as improvised mats. Minoru stood barefoot, his black sweats and plain t-shirt making him look more like an unassuming college student than someone who had gone toe-to-toe with elite killers. Akane mirrored him, wearing leggings and a loose workout shirt, though her movements were more hesitant. First rule of fighting, Minoru began, his tone serious, is knowing when not to fight. Akane blinked. Isn't that counterintuitive? Not at all, he said, gesturing for her to mirror his stance. Most fights can be avoided if you're aware of your surroundings and your options. But if you're cornered, he paused, his eyes darkening slightly. Then you make them regret it. He stepped forward, showing her the basic stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, one slightly forward, hands up to guard her face. She mimicked him, though her movements were clumsy. Good. Now balance is key. If your center of gravity is off, you're an easy target. Over the next hour, Minoru walked her through the fundamentals, how to throw a proper punch, how to block, and how to move without tripping over her own feet. Despite the simplicity, Akane struggled to keep up, her frustration evident. Don't overthink it, Minoru said after her third failed attempt at a simple jab. It's like riding a bike. Once your body remembers, it'll come naturally. After a water break, Minoru decided it was time for some light sparring. He donned a pair of old padded gloves he'd found in a closet and tossed a similar pair to Akane. I'll go easy, he assured her. She scowled playfully. You better. The sparring was slow and controlled. Minoru would feint a jab and Akane would try to block or dodge. At first she was all over the place, her blocks late and her footwork clumsy. But as the session went on, she started to improve, her movements becoming more fluid. Minoru couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she managed to land a glancing blow on his shoulder. Not bad, he said with a grin. Not bad, she panted, hands on her knees. That was perfect. He chuckled. Sure, let's go with that. As they wrapped up, Akane flopped onto one of the cushions, breathing heavily. You make it look so easy, she muttered. That's because I've been doing it for years, he replied, sitting cross-legged next to her. Akane turned her head to look at him. What? I mean, why did you start? Minoru hesitated, his gaze distant. Let's just say, I've always liked the idea of standing up to the things that hide in the dark. Later that night, with the rain giving way to a clear starry sky, Minoru sat on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, the cult Olivier and the looming battle that he knew was coming. Akane stepped out, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. She handed it to him without a word and sat beside him. You're quiet tonight, she said after a while. Just thinking, he replied, taking a sip of the tea. About what? About how I'm going to finish this. Akane frowned. You make it sound like a foregone conclusion. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the shadows cast by the streetlights below. They don't know me yet. Not really. But they will. And when they do, I want them to remember the name of the one who brought them down. Akane raised an eyebrow. A name? Minoru nodded. Yeah. A name to strike fear into them. Something that fits what I am and what I do. And what's that? He turned to her, a small, confident smirk on his lips. Shadow. I lurk in the shadows. I hunt the shadows. It's who I am now. Akane stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then with a faint smile she said, Shadow, huh? Sounds dramatic. But it suits you. For the first time in a long while, Minoru allowed himself a genuine smile. Then it settled. As the night deepened, Minoru sat on the balcony, the tea in his hands growing cold. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like stars, oblivious to the storm that was brewing in the shadows. Akane sat cross-legged in the dim light of Minoru's workshop, the wrist interface on the table before her. It had been days since she'd recovered it from the pile of discarded tech Minoru left behind. The device hummed faintly with energy, its faint glow casting dancing shadows on her focused face. Curiosity had gripped her ever since she stumbled upon it, and today she decided to learn more. "How do you even work this thing?" she murmured, tilting her head as her fingers brushed over its surface. The interface suddenly flickered to life, projecting a soft blue light. Lines of unfamiliar data scrolled across the surface, and Akane jumped slightly, startled. A small beep accompanied the appearance of a pulsing signal on its screen, a beacon leading somewhere. Her heart raced. What is this? And why is it still active? The signal felt urgent, insistent. Akane didn't know what lay at the end of the path, but something deep inside her pushed her to find out. Grabbing her jacket and the interface, she set off, following the signal through the winding streets of the city. The signal led her to the outskirts, where civilization gave way to unfinished buildings and half-plowed patches of land for future structures. She clutched the interface tightly as she weaved through the half-done structures. The pulse on the screen grew stronger, faster, as she approached an old abandoned lot. There, nestled among the debris, was a battered piece of tech. A dull, broken drone, its frame scorched and twisted, sat half-buried beneath rubble. Its faint, irregular blinks of light matched the pulsing signal from the interface. Akane crouched beside it, her heart pounding. "Umbra 03, she whispered, reading the faint marking etched into its side. It looked like something out of a science fiction film, and yet she knew it belonged to Minoru. Carefully, she brushed off the dirt and inspected its broken frame. One of its mechanical arms dangled uselessly, and its hull was riddled with cracks, but the faint glow of its central core showed it was still clinging to life. "This has to mean something," Akane muttered. With effort, she pried the drone free and carried it back toward the workshop. The workshop door creaked open as Akane stumbled inside, the weight of the drone making her arms ache. She set Umbra 03 down on the workbench with a huff, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Minoru," she called out, her voice echoing. "You'll never guess what I found." Minoru appeared from the far side of the workshop, his hands blackened with grease and his expression tired. When he saw the drone, his eyes widened in shock. "Umbra 03, he breathed, stepping closer. His hand brushed the broken shell of the drone with an almost reverent touch. "You found it?" Akane grinned, proud of her discovery. "I followed the signal from the wrist interface. I figured it might lead to something important, but I had no idea it'd be this." Minoru's gratitude was evident in his voice. "You have no idea how much this means to me. I thought it was lost for good." As he examined the drone, a faint click and whirring noise emanated from it. Both Akane and Minoru froze as Umbra 03's damaged core lit up, projecting a distorted stream of data onto the nearest screen. "What's it doing?" Akane asked, her eyes wide. Minoru's brow furrowed. "It's relaying something. Decoding data, maybe?" The stream of data resolved into a set of schematics. A sprawling base appeared on the screen, outlined with critical points marked in red. Akane gasped as she recognized some of the locations: underground tunnels, heavily fortified sectors, and a central core labeled as a critical weakness. Delta, the AI housed in Umbra 03, started to create reports on infiltration and sabotage. "This is..." Minoru's voice trailed off as he studied the screen. A slow, almost predatory smile spread across his face. "The cult's main stronghold," he said, his voice filled with both disbelief and anticipation. Akane looked at him, concern mixing with awe. "So, you can finally strike back." Minoru nodded, already piecing together a strategy in his mind. "This is their entire layout: defensive zones, infrastructure, weak points. They'll never see this coming." As he began scribbling notes and planning his assault, Akane couldn't help but feel both pride and apprehension. She had unknowingly set something monumental into motion, and though she trusted Minoru, the enormity of the task ahead weighed heavily on her. She glanced at Umbra 03's broken frame, then back at Minoru, who was completely absorbed in his work. "Be careful," she whispered, though he didn't hear her. Somewhere deep down, she knew this mission would change everything, for better or for worse. After weeks of grueling preparation, Minoru stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his suit. The man staring back at him was a far cry from the boy Akane had found at the construction site. His eyes were sharper, his expression colder. He activated the drones, watching as they hovered obediently by his side. Though, to ruin the moment slightly, one of them still wavered in place. Umbra 03 was connected to Akane's computer, both recovering its data and making a backup of itself in case of the drone's shutdown. Akane was a bit weirded out by knowing a living AI is in her computer, but Minoru promised Delta is about obedient as a puppy. An added benefit is that Umbra 03 had been refitted as a relay for anything Minoru would steal from the cult. More technology would always be a gift. Last but not least, Minoru wrote down all of the exercises and self-defense tactics and strategies he uses to get past anything he would find troublesome. He even wrote down some nifty notes and plans for boosting her everyday gadgets and things she owned for improved efficiency. Disappointingly, Minoru wasn't able to reconnect the wrist interface to his suit but fortunately was able to re-establish a connection to Umbra 03 and Delta. A fragment of Delta was also in his pocket, to be able to link up with the main Delta fragment from anywhere in the world. Minoru named it Pi, after how big the fragment was taking up space in his thumb drive. Finally, this is it, he thought, his heart pounding. As he stepped out of the garage, Akane was waiting for him. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. "Stay safe," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try," he replied, his tone betraying the uncertainty he felt. With that, he disappeared into the night, his makeshift arsenal ready for the battle ahead. The cult wouldn't see him coming, but they would feel his wrath. Time: unknown. Location: the cult's headquarters, Medical Bay. Date: unknown, approximately a few weeks after the ruins clash. Olivier sat on the examination table, the cold steel beneath her an unwelcome reminder of the cult's methods. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead bathed the sterile room in a stark, unfeeling glow. Around her, a team of cult scientists bustled with purpose, their movements mechanical as they adjusted instruments, took readings and whispered among themselves. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. It had been weeks since the incident at the ruins, weeks since the explosion that had consumed so much of what she once knew. The strange resonance she had felt during her clash with that man, the interloper, still lingered in her body, an unshakable echo of power that wasn't hers. And then there were the dreams of her, Aurora. The scientist had spoken of this, of the energy that had imprinted itself on Olivier's very essence. They referred to it clinically, residual Aurora energy. But to Olivier it felt far more intimate, far more invasive. It felt alive. The first dream came just days after the ruins. Olivier had woken in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. The images were fragmented but vivid. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, with hair like molten gold, stood in a sunlit meadow. Her laughter echoed, a sound so pure it felt alien to Olivier. But there was something wrong, something off. The girl's eyes, though wide and innocent, held an unnatural gleam, as though they were mirrors reflecting a truth too painful to comprehend. The meadow warped. The golden hues turned to ash. The girl screamed, her form shifting, elongating, twisting into something monstrous and ethereal. Olivier had awoken then, clutching her chest, her breaths shallow and rapid. But the dreams hadn't stopped. Night after night they came. The girl in the meadow. The laughter. The scream. Each time, the visions grew sharper, the emotions more visceral. "Her vitals are stable," one of the scientists murmured, his voice low. "But the neural scans show significant abnormalities," another countered. "Look at the hippocampal activity. She's processing memories that aren't hers." Could this be Aurora's influence? Undoubtedly. The subject's exposure to the core's energy must have facilitated a deep resonance. It's as though she's assimilating another identity. Olivier clenched her fists as she listened, her patience wearing thin. "Speak plainly," she snapped, her voice cutting through the sterile atmosphere like a blade. The lead scientist adjusted his glasses, hesitating before answering. "The energy from Aurora seems to have left an imprint on you, Lady Olivier. It's manifesting as memories, but not your own. We believe they're fragments of Aurora's consciousness." Olivier's eyes narrowed. Aurora's consciousness? A shadow of it, perhaps. Residual data embedded in the energy. It's possible that prolonged exposure could. "I don't care what it could do," Olivier interrupted, sliding off the table. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, grounding her. "What I care about is ensuring it doesn't affect my mission. Fix it. Now." The scientists exchanged uneasy glances. "It's not that simple, Lady Olivier. The influence isn't something we can simply remove. It's becoming part of you." The doctors had tried to explain it as a side effect of her exposure to the ruins' energy. Residual interference, they called it, as though it were static from a broken machine. But Olivier knew better. This wasn't some anomaly to be diagnosed or dismissed. It was deeper, more personal. After arguing at the impossibility of Aurora possessing her through memories, she resorted to trying to use a scalpel to pierce her brain in an act of psychosis and desperation. Fortunately for all involved, restraints and some tranquilizers stopped that from happening. When she woke up, she was back in her quarters. Fine. If the scientists couldn't help her, Olivier would take matters into her own hands. The only thing that had ever silenced the chaos in her mind was discipline, and so she threw herself into training with a single-minded fervor. Her sessions became grueling marathons of combat drills, weight training, and agility exercises. She reshaped her body, honing it into a weapon. Her sleek musculature betrayed no excess, every inch of her form designed for efficiency. She prioritized speed and power, knowing she could not afford to endure drawn-out battles. Every strike she delivered needed to count, and every movement had to be precise. Her training was relentless. She moved like a shadow, darting through obstacle courses set with live traps. Her strikes shattered training dummies, and her speed made her a blur to even the most advanced surveillance systems. Yet even in the heat of battle, the echoes of Aurora remained. Olivier stood before a mirror in the cult's underground training facility, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Sweat dripped from her brow, tracing lines down her lithe frame. Her reflection stared back at her, unyielding. But then it changed. For a fleeting moment, the face in the mirror was not her own. The golden-haired girl stared back, her eyes filled with a haunting sorrow. Olivier blinked and the vision was gone. "Enough," she hissed, slamming a fist into the glass. The mirror shattered, shards falling like raindrops to the floor. With the destroyed mirror couldn't hold her gaze any longer. She turned away and began to pace the room, her movements sharp and restless. Her thoughts turned to him. The man who had humiliated her, who had stood against the cult and survived. Minoru Kageno. His name was like a brand on her mind, searing and persistent. She remembered their fight with vivid clarity, every strike, every counter, every maddening moment where he seemed to slip through her grasp. He was unlike any opponent she had ever faced, not because of his strength but because of his unpredictability. Her obsession with defeating him had grown into something she couldn't control. It wasn't just about the cult's mission anymore. It was personal. She dropped to the floor and began a series of push-ups, her body moving with mechanical precision. With each motion, she muttered under her breath. Stronger, faster, smarter. But as the hours wore on, her focus wavered. Aurora's voice, faint and distant, whispered to her. "Why do you fight? Is it for power? For purpose? Or for something you've forgotten?" "No," Olivier shouted, her voice echoing in the empty room. She slammed her fists against the floor, her breathing ragged. "I fight for me, for my strength, for my will." But the voice persisted, a nagging presence that she couldn't silence. The cult had provided her with every resource to perfect her skills. Advanced weaponry, combat simulations, even experimental enhancements, all were at her disposal. But no amount of technology could quell the storm inside her. She threw herself into her training, pushing her body to its limits and beyond. Every punch, every kick was a declaration of defiance against the specter of Aurora's influence. The sleekness of her frame, her speed, her precision, all became tools for her obsession. She was crafting herself into a weapon, one with a single purpose, to destroy Minoru. But there were cracks in her resolve. In moments of stillness, when the adrenaline faded and the silence crept in, doubts emerged. "Why does he haunt me?" she wondered. It wasn't just anger or pride that drove her obsession. There was something deeper, something unspoken that made her stomach churn whenever she thought of him. The cult's council observed her from a distance, their expressions a mix of awe and unease. "She grows stronger," one noted, his tone laced with both admiration and trepidation. "But at what cost?" another countered. "Her mental state is deteriorating. Aurora's influence is seeping into her very being." "Then we must keep her focused," the first elder replied. "Olivier is our greatest weapon. If she falters, so does the cult." Alone in her quarters, Olivier sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the runes etched into the walls. Her breaths were steady, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. She didn't know who the golden-haired girl was or why she haunted her dreams. She didn't know what Aurora's energy had done to her or what it would continue to do. But she knew one thing: she would not break. Olivier opened her eyes, her gaze steely. If Aurora sought to make her a pawn, she would turn that power against her enemies. If the memories sought to weaken her, she would use them to sharpen her resolve. The cult needed her and she would not fail. As she stood before the cult's elders, they praised her progress, their voices dripping with condescension and manipulation. They spoke of Project Epsilon, of the cult's grand vision for the world, but Olivier barely listened. Her mind was already elsewhere. The core of the base called to her. She could feel it, a pulsating energy that resonated with the mark on her body. It was there that she would confront him again. She knew it. Her lips curled into a smirk as she left the council chamber. Let them panic. Let them squabble and scheme. She had her own path, one that didn't rely on their approval. She tightened the straps of her armor, the weight of it grounding her. In the reflection of a passing window she saw herself, sleek, deadly, and unrelenting. Let him come, she said, her voice a low growl. This time I'll finish it. But even as she spoke the words, a faint whisper lingered in the back of her mind, a voice that was not her own. Are you sure that's what you want? She didn't know. Extra chapter. Umbra's data decoded by Delta AI, Part 1. Entrance main area. Delta's report, access point analysis. Subject. Access point 17B exterior tunnel entry. Status, active but minimally utilized. Purpose, primarily for vehicle entry and large-scale equipment transfer. Overview. Access point 17B is an above-ground tunnel entry nestled at the edge of a sparsely forested industrial zone. The surrounding terrain slopes gently downward toward the tunnel mouth, which opens into a reinforced concrete structure. The tunnel itself descends steeply underground, leading to the cult's outdated logistical network. Although once critical for moving supplies and equipment, this route has been relegated to occasional use due to the cult's adoption of more covert supply chains. Surrounding environment. Perimeter. The tunnel lies in a forgotten part of the district, surrounded by rusting fences and derelict buildings. Many of these structures appear abandoned but could serve as makeshift sentry points. Vegetation is sparse, with scrubby grass and patches of weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt. A few trees line the area, providing natural concealment. Surface features. The road leading to the access point is fractured and uneven, with faded lane markings hinting at its age. Tire tracks suggest intermittent vehicle use, though the density of markings indicates traffic is infrequent. Surveillance. Camera systems appear functional but poorly maintained. Regular intervals show dead zones in coverage due to misaligned or damaged equipment. Guards present near the tunnel are inattentive and under-equipped, likely assuming no one would dare to approach this remote entry. Tunnel entrance. Design. The reinforced concrete facade is marred by cracks and weathering but remains structurally sound. Large steel doors mark the entry point, accessible via biometric and keycard systems. Security presence. On-site guards. 2 guards patrol sporadically, showing no discernible pattern or coordination. Both appear undertrained with limited focus on their tasks. Equipment. Standard sidearms, low-grade body armor, and analog radios. Vehicular checkpoint. A small control booth flanks the entrance. Its operator is often absent, with the booth's interior showing signs of neglect, including empty coffee cups and discarded cigarette butts. Weaknesses. The guard's low alertness and limited communication capabilities render the checkpoint vulnerable. A gap in the camera system overlooks the northern perimeter and offers a potential entry route. A malfunctioning side panel on the biometric lock suggests it could be bypassed with minimal effort. Interior tunnel conditions. Atmosphere. The tunnel's interior feels forgotten, with faint echoes of its former use. Dust coats the walls and occasional drips of water seep through the cracks, hinting at minor structural decay. Infrastructure. Dim overhead lighting alternates between flickering and outright failure, creating stretches of near-complete darkness. The floor is worn smooth from years of use, but recent foot and vehicle traffic is sparse, judging by the thin layer of grime. Hazards. Occasional exposed wiring hangs dangerously close to the tunnel walls. An emergency exit halfway down the tunnel is boarded up, suggesting neglect in maintaining escape routes. Conclusion and recommendations. The above-ground location and infrequent use make Access Point 17 be an ideal infiltration site. Its weaknesses in surveillance, undertrained personnel, and poorly maintained infrastructure suggest it is a low-priority target for the cult. However, the presence of biometric access protocols indicates that it still connects to critical internal systems. For a successful breach, exploit guard inattentiveness to eliminate resistance quickly. Use the camera dead zone on the northern perimeter for initial approach. Prepare for potential surprises beyond the tunnel entrance, as the cult may have secondary defenses deeper inside. This overlooked access point offers an opportunity for surgical infiltration with minimal resistance, perfect for a strike against the cult's operations. Delta's report. Base interior analysis. Subject. Cult base interior sector Alpha 7. Status. Active partially mapped. Purpose: logistics, research, and general operations. Overview. Sector Alpha 7 serves as one of the cult's key operational hubs, with infrastructure supporting logistics, personnel, housing, and research. The design prioritizes efficiency over aesthetics, resulting in a stark, utilitarian environment. Despite its clinical design, the sector's reliance on a single, central power source makes it a significant vulnerability. Disabling or destroying this power supply could cripple the cult's operations within the base and beyond. Interior layout. Primary features: corridors and rooms. Narrow corridors connect various sections, with reinforced doors securing key locations. Rooms are tightly packed with minimal furnishings, reflecting a focus on utility rather than comfort. Lighting and ventilation. Low, flickering lights illuminate most areas, creating deep shadows that can obscure movement. Ventilation ducts are expansive and accessible but may trigger alarms if tampered with. Personnel presence. The base is moderately staffed with guards, technicians, and researchers. Activity fluctuates depending on the time of day, but Sector Alpha 7 never fully quiets down. Sector subsections. Command and control room. A central location housing consoles that monitor the base's internal and external activity. Equipped with outdated but still functional security feeds and communications equipment. Personnel: 2 rotating shifts of senior cult officers oversee operations. Weakness: over-reliance on outdated systems makes the consoles vulnerable to external interference or direct sabotage. Research laboratories. Contains experimental chambers and equipment linked to Aurora-based energy research. Personnel: scientists conducting weaponization studies, guarded by a small security detail. Weakness: the labs require constant power for containment and experimentation. A power failure would render them inoperable and potentially release unstable energy. Barracks. Dormitory-style housing for low to mid-level cult operatives. Personnel: moderate concentration of off-duty soldiers at any time, equipped but relaxed. Weakness: minimal defenses during downtime. An assault during this period could catch personnel unprepared. Armory and equipment depot. Stockpiles weapons, armor, and other supplies for operatives. Personnel: heavily guarded by elite cult forces. Weakness: despite high security, the depot's isolation from the main power grid suggests limited defenses if power is disrupted. Critical target: power core facility. Location: situated beneath Sector Alpha 7 in a subterranean chamber reinforced by steel and concrete. Structure: the power core is a fusion of traditional and cult technology, heavily reliant on Aurora-based energy converters. Cooling systems and energy stabilizers ensure continuous operation but are prone to overheating if tampered with. Personnel: lightly staffed by technicians trained in energy maintenance. Guards are present but far fewer than other critical areas, likely due to the base's overconfidence in the facility's isolation and security measures. Weaknesses: cooling dependency. Damaging the coolant pipes could cause a catastrophic overload within minutes. Access points. Primary access through the main tunnel, guarded by a single checkpoint. Secondary access through ventilation shafts, though tight spaces limit mobility. Chain reaction risk. An overload in the core could destabilize the entire base, rendering all connected systems useless and causing structural damage. Conclusion and recommendations. The cult's reliance on Sector Alpha 7's power core presents a critical opportunity for destabilization. Disabling the power supply would render all automated defenses inoperative, including security turrets, surveillance systems, and containment units. Disrupt communications between the base and external cult locations. Force personnel to evacuate, creating chaos and disorganization. Operational strategy. Infiltrate Sector Alpha 7 and identify the quickest route to the power core facility. Use the current state of chaos and undertrained personnel to exploit weaknesses. Sabotage the core by targeting cooling systems or destabilizing the energy converters. Extract before overload to avoid being caught in the resulting destruction. Disabling the power supply here could turn the tide against the cult, exposing their operations and creating the opportunity for a decisive strike. End report. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share, and donate for more videos.